In a quiet Kansas town, where wheat fields stretch for miles and the wind seems to whisper stories of old, lived a young woman named Emily Carter. At 25, with soft brown hair often tied back and eyes carrying the strength that only small-town hardships could forge, she worked every day as a waitress at the local diner, where locals gathered over breakfast, gossip, and a shared longing for something new. But for Emily, every day felt the same. After her shift, she returned to a weathered wooden home where her father lay bedridden and her mother struggled to make ends meet. Ever since her father fell ill and they had to sell their small farm, Emily had been working tirelessly, clinging to the hope of restoring the life they once had. One late afternoon, just like any other, Mrs. Morgan, the diner's owner, called her into the kitchen. "You'll want to hear this," she said with an oddly serious look. Emily wiped her hands on her apron and stepped inside. "My niece, Tina, she's working out in the suburbs of Los Angeles. There's a family there looking for a live-in babysitter. The pay is decent, room and board included." I told her I might know someone perfect for it. "You," Mrs. Morgan said bluntly. Emily froze. She had never stepped outside Kansas in her life. But a voice echoed in her mind. This could be the chance. To help your family, to buy the land back, to break the cycle. Her hands clasped together, her eyes uncertain but burning with the quiet fire of hope. I'll go," she said. The bus ride lasted nearly 2 days, taking Emily far from dusty back roads and cornfields to a place that felt like another universe, Los Angeles. As the bus entered the Brentwood suburb, her eyes widened in disbelief. Pristine roads, mansion-sized houses, manicured hedges, everything screamed wealth, a far cry from the worn-down world she came from. Tina met her at the station. Dressed in trendy clothes with a bright personality, she guided Emily toward the Westwood estate, a 3-story mansion that looked straight out of a Hollywood set. There was a pool, a fountain, automatic gates, and even a butler who greeted them at the front door. As Emily stepped inside, she felt both intimidated and curious. But the surprises weren't over yet. Moments later, a graceful woman descended the grand staircase. Mrs. Valerie Westwood. "You must be Emily Carter?" she asked in a refined voice. "Good. Your tasks are simple. Clean the room, do the laundry, and most importantly, keep an eye on my son." "Your son?" Emily blinked. "I thought it was a child." Right then, a tall young man strolled down the hall, leather jacket, tousled hair, and a smirk that could melt or infuriate a glacier. "Who's the hot chick?" he said. Brandon Westwood, 24, handsome, rebellious, and very much not a child. Emily froze. She glanced at Tina, who only chuckled. "Surprise." Brandon gave her a lazy grin. "So? You're my babysitter. Cute." Every part of Emily wanted to turn around and leave. But then, her mother's hopeful eyes flashed in her mind. Her father's fragile smile. The land they lost. She swallowed hard. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I start today." The first few days at the Westwood estate felt like hell for Emily. Brandon was everything she disliked. Lazy, cocky, and absolutely infuriating. She cleaned rooms, folded his clothes, made his breakfast, while he lounged around watching TV, left his stuff everywhere, or zoomed out on his motorcycle without a word to anyone. "You're not my mom, so quit acting like one," Brandon said one morning when Emily blocked the doorway. "You're right. I'm not your mom," Emily replied, arms crossed. "I'm the person hired to keep you out of trouble." One morning, after Brandon dumped a pile of dirty clothes on the freshly mopped floor, Emily lost it. She grabbed a broom and chased him around the living room. Brandon laughed like a child, dodging her swings as they ran in circles, bickering like cats and dogs. But no one expected the moment when Emily tripped. Brandon caught her, and their lips accidentally met in a surprise kiss. Silence. They both froze. Emily's face flushed red as she pulled away and bolted. Brandon stood still, stunned. After that, Brandon began to change. in the strangest ways. He started waking up early and cooking breakfast. One morning, Emily walked into the kitchen to find him flipping eggs, wearing her pink apron with heart prints. "Good morning, alligator," he grinned. "What?" "Alligator. That's your nickname when you're mad. You're terrifying like one." Emily glared at him, but couldn't stop the smile creeping on her lips. Brandon started helping fold laundry, learned the names of cleaning products, and folded napkins into heart shapes whenever she wasn't looking. But Emily knew better. This had to be another one of Brandon's games. He was the spoiled rich boy, and she was just the broke babysitter from Kansas. Her heart may have started to flutter, but her mind warned her, "Don't fall, Emily. Don't fall for a joke." Yet the way Brandon looked at her began to change. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was something else, something real, and maybe he didn't understand it either. Each day, Emily felt herself slipping further into something she couldn't control. Her heart fluttered whenever Brandon smiled, whenever he stood too close. But every time she saw the glare of his luxury motorcycle or heard the laughter of his wealthy friends, reality came crashing in. He's not meant for me. One night, when Brandon casually asked, "What if I'm serious?" and looked at her with eyes that held no hint of sarcasm, Emily knew this had to stop. She couldn't afford to fall into a dream that might shatter by morning. The next morning, she left the Westwood estate. No goodbyes, no letters, just her pink apron left hanging quietly in the kitchen. When Brandon realized she was gone, his first reaction was anger, then confusion, and finally, silence. But that silence didn't last long. He packed a bag, threw it in his trunk, and drove across state lines, leaving behind city lights, to find the girl he once saw as just the babysitter. After more than a day on the road, Brandon arrived in the small Kansas town where Emily lived. He found the diner where she used to work, sat quietly at a booth, and waited. When Emily walked in, hands still dusted with flour, her eyes landed on Brandon sitting silently in the corner. Her heart skipped a beat. "You know, you drive me insane in the best possible way," Brandon said, standing. "What are you doing here?" she gasped. "To chase the only person who ever made me feel at home," he replied without hesitation. Emily turned away, unable to face the storm of emotions rising inside. "You didn't have to. You don't belong here." Brandon stepped closer, locking eyes with her. "Then I'll learn how to, because being near you is the only place I ever want to be again." Emily used to think Brandon would give up after a few days, when there was no fancy coffee, no full-blast air conditioning, and no late-night parties. But he didn't leave. He stayed, stubbornly. The next morning, before the sun even rose, Emily found him sitting on the steps of Mrs. Morgan's diner. "Any chance you need an extra hand?" he asked, nearly making Mrs. Morgan drop her coffee pot. From that day on, Brandon did everything. Washed dishes, carried trays, wiped tables. He was clumsy, spilled coffee on customers, dropped forks, but he bowed, apologized, and kept going like being yelled at was some kind of blessing. Emily watched from the kitchen, shaking her head in disbelief. The guy who once mocked her napkin folding was now polishing spoons like his life depended on it. But he didn't stop there. Brandon started helping Mrs. Ann, Emily's mom, take care of her father. He carried firewood, fixed a leaky pipe, made soup from her old recipes. In the afternoons, he pushed Mr. Carter's wheelchair to the porch so he could sit in the sun and share stories of his youth on the farm. "This kid, he's not what I expected," Mr. Carter muttered once, catching Emily off guard. As the summer fair approached, Brandon volunteered to help set up the stage, string up lights, and even learned how to dance a slow two-step just so he wouldn't look out of place that night. "Why are you doing all this?" Emily asked one afternoon as they stacked chairs behind the diner. "Because I've never taken anything seriously in my life," Brandon said softly, "until I met you." Emily didn't reply. She just stared at the boy who once felt like a nightmare in that mansion, now standing in the sun, dirt on his hands, and smiling like he belonged. Her feelings were no longer easy to ignore. They grew quietly each day with every drop of sweat, every glance, every clumsy but genuine effort Brandon made to prove he was more than just a spoiled city boy. The night of the town fair finally arrived. The whole place glowed under hundreds of string lights. The scent of baked pies, popcorn, and the soft twang of country music filled the air, as if coaxing even the most guarded hearts to open. Emily wore a simple floral dress. She didn't expect Brandon to come, yet her eyes kept searching for him in the crowd. Then he appeared, in a plain white shirt, hair neatly combed, hands in his pockets like he was hiding his nerves. When their eyes met, the world seemed to pause. No music, no lights. Just them and that moment. "Came alone?" Brandon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't you say you were learning to fit in?" She replied with a shaky smile. "I did. Now I want to try staying." The music shifted into a slow ballad. Without another word, Brandon held out his hand. Emily hesitated for a beat before placing hers into his. They danced under the warm lights and soft melody. Not graceful, not perfect, but honest. As the song neared its end, Brandon leaned in. "I love you, Emily, not because you're different, but because you make me want to be." Emily's throat tightened, her eyes shimmered. "You know," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder, "I was scared, because for the first time, I didn't want to run." Brandon gently pulled her closer, and in that embrace, Emily realized something. Some things find us when we least expect it, and if we're brave enough to let them in, they can change our lives forever. Since the night of the town fair, everything between Emily and Brandon felt like a new chapter. Calm, real, and full of quiet joy. They didn't need anything extravagant. Just morning coffees on the old porch steps, or golden hour walks through endless wheat fields hand in hand. Brandon was no longer the reckless boy she had met. He learned to love silence, to treasure simplicity, to love Emily the way she needed, not the way he used to know. A few weeks later, Brandon brought Emily back to Los Angeles, not as a nanny, but as the woman he loved. When they stepped into the Westwood estate, Mrs. Valerie was already waiting on the steps, her gaze no longer skeptical. "You really brought her back?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. Brandon smiled, holding Emily's hand tighter. "Yes, Mom, and I can't imagine anyone better for me." Mrs. Valerie looked at Emily for a long moment, then gave a soft nod. "Welcome to the family." Life flowed peacefully after that, until one sunny morning, Brandon greeted Emily with a mysterious grin. "Where are we going?" she asked, seeing him prep the car. "A surprise trip. Bring a white dress," he winked. They arrived at the Santa Barbara coastline by late afternoon, where the sunlight danced on the waves. As Emily turned to face the sea, Brandon knelt behind her, holding out a simple but stunning ring that shimmered in the setting sun. "Emily Carter," he called. She turned, hands flying to her mouth. "I never thought I'd take anything seriously in life until you showed up like a storm, a gentle one. Please, let me be the one who earns your forever, because you've already changed mine." Emily laughed through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. Not long after that beachside proposal, Emily and Brandon decided to have a wedding. Not in a fancy hotel in Los Angeles, not under chandeliers in a ballroom. They chose somewhere else, somewhere that belonged to her and now belonged to him too, a small town in Kansas where their love was built one quiet moment at a time. The ceremony took place in the open field behind Emily's parents' house. There were no velvet chairs, no designer gowns, just wildflowers gathered from the garden, hand-stitched tablecloths, and the warm smiles of neighbors who had seen their love grow from strangers to soulmates. Brandon wore a simple suit, but the way he looked at Emily as she stepped out of her childhood home said everything. His gaze full of reverence, gratitude, and a love deeper than anything he'd ever known. Emily wore a white dress sewn by her mother over several loving weeks. In her hands wasn't a bouquet of imported roses, but a bundle of lavender, symbolizing peace and perseverance, much like the love she and Brandon had carefully nurtured. Mrs. Valerie sat in the front row, her eyes shimmering. The woman who once doubted a country girl now beamed with pride as she watched her son marry the one who changed him for the better. And the pastor asked, "Do you promise to love her for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, for all the days of your life?" Brandon answered without hesitation, "I once lived not knowing who I was, but from the day Emily entered my life, I've known exactly the man I want to be. I vow to love her, not just today, but even on the days when our hair turns silver." Emily's tears fell freely. She squeezed Brandon's hand as if holding a promise she knew would never be broken. After the ceremony, instead of a luxurious reception, they celebrated with grilled ribs made by Brandon and Emily's father, pies baked by Mrs. Morgan, and apple cider gifted from the neighbors. The music came from an old speaker, but every note was filled with honest joy. As night fell, Emily rested her head on Brandon's shoulder. "You know," she whispered, "if someone had told me a guy like you would give all this up to stay here, I would have laughed." Brandon kissed her forehead. "I thought I had to go far to find what mattered. Turns out it was you and all the simple things you brought with you." Together, they gazed at the starry night sky, fingers entwined. No more words were needed. Everything was understood in the quiet between them. And so, the love between a city boy and a country girl didn't just survive, it thrived. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, grown from humble soil and watered every day with choice, not chance.